So I'm pleased to be joined today by Bernard Golden, who is the Vice President of Enterprise Solutions with Enstratius, one of our technology partners. In addition, we have Miles Ward, who's a Senior Solutions Architect with Amazon Web Services. Without further delay, I'd like to turn it over to you, Miles, to take it away.
Sherry, I really appreciate the introduction, and thank you for everyone on the webinar for taking the time to join us today. My job here is to hopefully set a little bit of the stage of what we're seeing in enterprise computing and highlight some places where ever more advanced management tools like Enstratius can add a lot of value. So to dig in around that, I think it helps to kind of set the basic context. How are enterprises using AWS? Third thing that businesses do on top of AWS is build whole new businesses, whole new lines of service, building cloud first and thinking cloud oriented in their life. Amazon's built a set of basic global infrastructure that supports programmatically managed networking that allows us to deliver advanced compute resources, storage resources, and database resources that serve as the foundational components of net new application hosting models, as well as application services that we offer, and a whole series of tools for deployment and administration of those services. There are literally 36 AWS products today, so it may take us a little longer than we have on today's webinar to go through and name each one of them. But suffice to say, we've built a platform that allows you to very rapidly recreate or create from scratch whole infrastructures for managing applications. So we do that now across the globe. There are 9 different regions for AWS, comprised out of 25 distinct availability zones, and then overlaid with over 30 CloudFront points of presence and a continuous process of expansion to ensure that we are growing to meet the needs of global customers. We're also growing in terms of capacity. So in 2003, for a 7,800 employee, over $5 billion retail business, Amazon.com used a bunch of computers. You can imagine racks and racks and racks of stuff that it takes to run a company like that. For example, Clorox or VMware today are $5 billion businesses. In 2013, today, we had enough server capacity to power that enterprise every day, on Valentine's Day, on Christmas. Every day of the year, we're adding that amount of infrastructure. So huge rate of growth, huge rate of adoption, and something that we think a lot of enterprises take a lot of benefit from because they don't have to do that work. And many enterprises now are real reference customers for us. These aren't companies that your mom hasn't ever heard of. They're clear, obvious, market-leading Fortune 100 serious users of our system that are building business-critical applications on top of us. And it's not just the customers or us that think that we're doing well. The analysts agree. We're way in the upper right-hand corner. I have seen a lot of these charts, and I haven't seen that kind of gap in a long time. And our customers recognize that gap exists, that there's a huge difference between us and the rest of the playing field. I think a big driver for that difference is just the degree of savings that exist. How much can you build when you don't have to wait for physical infrastructure to get delivered, when you don't have to pre-provision and pre-purchase and spend a whole bunch of capital up front in order to deliver? So this is a piece of research by IDC that show that the systems built on top of AWS can be up to 4 times more reliable at 1/4 the cost of on-premises infrastructure. That's a big difference. We've also worked very hard, in multiple different channels, not only physical but logical controls around enterprise security. We are ISO 27001 certified. We are capable of achieving FISMA moderate together with government customers. We've gotten really clear endorsement from hundreds of businesses working in HIPAA compliance and SOC compliance. We're compatible with the ITAR rules. Each of the different industries that have their own focus on security and security practice and security procedure, we've already started or finished the process of achieving their security views and helping them understand our approach to security. It's a place where every customer on AWS takes huge benefit from our focus and our investment in security, and we consider it a positive differentiator where you can build systems here that are more secure than almost anywhere else. That's not a quote from me. That's from the head of the CIA, if you want to look that up. We've also really seen customers using AWS and the system for all sorts of different stuff. So I think a great simple example is if you're developing new software, you're building new solutions, you do not have time to wait for infrastructure provisioning. We work together with Shell to deliver a huge amount of application systems, development environments, test environments, all the different kinds of temporary infrastructure that even though you want to spin it up one day and tear it down the next, the aggregate of that workload is very challenging for sort of old school IT to be able to accommodate, and it's simple for us. So it makes it a place where Shell's earned a huge amount of business agility as a result of the speed with which we can provision. Another great example, if you don't have another copy, we know lots of businesses that know how they should be backing up. That doesn't mean that they're doing what they should do to back up. And a lot of the barrier for that is complexity and cost. We've worked really hard to lower the bar, make it super easy to back up and make highly available your systems and to design very sophisticated disaster recovery practices at a minimum of cost. A great example of that is Glacier, a backup archival service for data storage. Stores data at a penny a gigabyte a month. If you can't afford to protect your data at a penny a gigabyte, then maybe you should be evaluating what you have that data for in the first place. So we've really, we think, made it so that you can implement real disaster recovery at a fraction of previous costs. We've also worked really hard with businesses as because of this sort of cost disruption and ease of deployment, have started to look at whole business opportunities that they didn't think were possible before. We worked together with NASDAQ to build OMX, a system that allows them, through a tool now called ThinCloud, to make the data from NASDAQ available to analysts all around the world. And that data system just wasn't possible from a scale standpoint, from a security standpoint, and from a sort of total cost of the package in comparison to what they could earn from the system in any other way than AWS. Very exciting use case. We've also worked really closely with Samsung. I don't know if any of you have used one of their new smart TVs, but a smart hub infrastructure as a part of that TV, one, is a differentiating feature of the product, but two, is delivered at a substantially lower cost than many previous iterations of the service, makes it so that customers around the world get a better TV browsing experience and a better experience with Samsung. We also have heard from enterprises that while the successes are important and they want to, they're eager to hear that there are hundreds of customers doing great things and that maybe their workloads fit into our cases, that it really does come down to the benefit that the individual values of AWS and our approach to cloud computing, public cloud computing, are the differentiator between doing this any other way. So businesses really are actually capital constrained. They do need to build systems without the constraint of an upfront capital expense. All businesses are price compressed. I know of no customer out there that says, I would use this if only you would just charge me a little bit more. And it's also becoming readily apparent that, anything that you can do to make it so that when you're not using something, you stop paying for it, has such a huge opportunity to reduce the cost of delivery of service. A lot of things we can't predict. We have quotes all over the place that show customers embracing us because we allowed them to excel in situations where prediction was impossible. And so when you only pay for what you use, whether that's more than you expect or less than you expect, it's a very powerful tool to accommodate growth. It's also something we deliver in a completely self-service way. It's very different than your normal IT infrastructure environment. We can move as fast as you can move because you're the ones clicking the buttons, and you can programmatically control all of that infrastructure. Any software you write, you can use to manage AWS. That control allows you to scale up and down super quickly, and as a result allows you to get into market opportunities and market spaces much, much more rapidly. So we've also really seen and heard from enterprise customers that hybrid IT, this concept of leveraging the capacity and power of public cloud in the context of existing on-premises resources is a super important mission for most corporate CIOs and CTOs. The computers that they have and the systems that they build, they're not just evaporating tomorrow. Some workloads are much better fits for cloud. Some workloads work today just fine in their on-premise resources, and everyone is resource constrained. So businesses are looking to be able to take advantage of the places where there's disruptive cost and performance benefits in the cloud and minimize the work effort required to take advantage of those systems. And we've added some tools there. We recognize that hybrid requires support, that it's not just a matter of all the smart developers out there figuring out how to plug one thing into another thing. And we've tried to pave the road a little bit by adding services like the storage gateway, allowing integration between your Active Directory and our identity and access management systems, allowing you to import and export virtual machines. But even these tools, while sophisticated, really represent kind of a starting point. And many, many enterprises and businesses that we've talked to want more tools, want more ability to assert their governance rules and their controls into our systems, want to be able to centrally administrate multiple different tool platforms, and really take advantage of all of their existing investments in security controls and policy design. That's one place, and I think there are several places where Enstratius adds a huge amount of value. So I'm excited to introduce the Enstratius folks and let them take you through their product.
All right. Thanks so much, Miles. I really appreciate the introduction and appreciate the information you gave us, and I'm looking forward to sharing about Enstratius. And Enstratius is a cloud management platform oriented toward the enterprise market and specifically focused on being able to manage hybrid heterogeneous cloud environments. Let me tell you a little bit about our company. We're founded on the belief that agility, governance, and choice are fundamental requirements for cloud computing success. One of the things that AWS really pioneered is the old way of doing IT just isn't acceptable anymore. The kind of, it'll take 6 weeks to get a virtual machine provisioned and months to roll out applications, and they're not very flexible. Those days are over. And so agility, you've got governance. We'll be talking about that a little bit further, but you can't leave behind governance. You still need to bring forward all those requirements. And then choice. Because applications require the appropriate deployment environment, you need to be able to support that. We provide products and services to help our customers transform their businesses through the use of cloud computing. I'll be sharing a case study today that I think will really illustrate that and help you understand how we help companies do these things. We have a number of industry-recognized cloud luminaries working in the company. We're very proud of that because we have the best thought leadership and the best insight in the industry, helping inform our vision and work with our customers. And we've been selected, we're proud to have been selected by global companies like McGraw-Hill, Accenture, and Deutsche Telekom to manage their cloud computing environments. And here's some pictures of some clients, and you'll see McGraw-Hill, Informatica, Accenture, and so forth. Let's jump right into cloud agility. What is cloud agility? Well, one is developer self-provisioning. That is for sure important. And that's where many people start and stop when they think about cloud agility, but really that's only a part of the picture, and maybe not even the biggest part of the picture. You want to be able to share automated application deployment among the development team. You don't want every developer to have to recreate their own development environment, install their components, get them all configured and all that. It's a huge time sink. You want to be able to automate that. You want to be able to have full application lifecycle support with no manual handoffs. So when an application goes from development into operations, you don't want the operations group to have to start from scratch and say, well, give me the list of all the components and all the connectivity, and I'll start to build all of that once again. Because anytime you have a manual handoff, you introduce time lags, which harms agility, and you also introduce the opportunity for errors. And errors, cause problems and crashes and bugs and aren't good. So you want complete application lifecycle management. We'll talk about that today. Here's a typical enterprise scenario that we encounter when we go and talk to customers such as the type that I've outlined. They don't have one cloud initiative. They have multiple cloud initiatives. And they're often not coordinated, and they're typically not consistent. And that's a real challenge because Team A may be a digital marketing group working with Amazon and doing lots of different applications. They've got highly variable loads, so Amazon's a good match. But they may not have a good approach to doing key management and central logging. So, they may be virtually separate groups, separate applications, not much coordination. Team B, maybe is doing an internal thing based on vCloud and vSphere. Team C, they've got yet another choice that they're doing. And, their question is, what kinds of access controls and do we have automation in place? And then Team D may be in another geography doing yet another one. And commonly, the security team may not be aware of or involved with one or more of these kinds of initiatives. The central operations team sometimes isn't aware and sometimes is actually excluded. And in part, that's because central IT often has a reputation as not being very focused on supporting agility, being more focused on supporting governance and controls and so forth. And new business units today, find that unacceptable. And of course, if you're the CIO, you're looking at that going, holy moly, I've got a real challenge on my hands and some exposure. There's a big problem. How do I deal with service levels, disaster recovery, governance and security? How do I address shadow IT? I mean, many people think of shadow IT as being rogue IT or bad, but it's a reflection of business units being chartered with having to get new kinds of initiatives off the ground and not having enough time to wait. So, how does CIOs be able to address those requirements without without trying to shut them down? And then, what about compliance requirements? Huge issues. So this is a typical enterprise scenario that we walk into literally every day. In terms of the Enstratius cloud management platform, what we bring into place is a single, consistent management framework that will encompass all of these environments. We have an open source encapsulation layer that basically provides a very rich taxonomy of cloud functionality. And depending on the cloud environment that we are interacting with, we can expose more or less functionality depending on what the cloud itself supports. So if a cloud is like an Amazon and supports something like elastic load balancers, we can expose those elastic load balancers and make them available to be used by the applications. If the cloud doesn't support a kind of a native load balancing, but those have to be loaded into the virtual machine instances that are operating, we support that approach as well. But we will expose as much of the functionality that is native to the cloud environment as practicable, which we view as a requirement, but unfortunately many of our competitors don't, and so they give you kind of a lowest common denominator approach. You can start and stop a virtual machine anywhere. And that's a challenge because much of the richness that you turn to at Amazon for is because of the additional platform services. If you look toward the top of this, you'll see that we have a very rich set of APIs that enable us to integrate with existing system management products that may already be in place. So we don't sort of dictate, oh, you've got to replace the way you do business today. We integrate with it and support it. And then we're very strong advocates of using configuration management tools like Chef and Puppet, and we integrate with those natively. You can use native Chef recipes right out of the box and use those to configure virtual machines, and then use us to manage the collection of virtual machines. So we do not need to replace that. We don't prevent you from using it. In fact, we support it fully. Post Enstratius, all of a sudden you can see that there's a consistent set of use cases that people are using. They have one management framework. We manage all those cloud environments, provide all of that. We can integrate with the on-premise identity management system for access controls. We can, as I just mentioned about the configuration management. And security and central ops typically can be involved and ensure that their governance requirements are in place without impacting the kind of agility that business units are looking toward. If we turn to kind of, okay, what does this mean for actual applications? The legacy application lifecycle management is a very stop and start kind of process. And every step, there's a different group involved and a different deliverable, different tools, and typically a manual process. So for example, a developer is ready to start. They contact the central sysadmin group and say, I need a virtual machine. Someone sits down at the virtual machine console and creates a virtual machine and then sends over an IP address for it. For many of our customers, traditionally that took something like 3 to 6 weeks. Incredible, but there you are. So 3 to 6 weeks, the person's sitting on their hands, not being able to get their work done. When they actually get those resources and start doing development, they are installing software components and configurations by hand. And that's every member of the development group. So every time a new person starts on the project, they've got to rebuild an entire application configuration environment to be able to usefully contribute. Again, that's a manual process. When it comes time to deploy the application and put it into operations, into production, what gets handed over is a set of descriptions. These are all the components. These are how they got to be configured. Here's the code components, and then they start from scratch and rebuild that and put it in production. And again, that can, very manual process, very error-prone, very lengthy for sure. And then in operation, as the application experiences the ebb and flow of system traffic and so forth, if the organization wants to make a change and add more virtual machines or scale up, typically that goes back to the operations group and somebody does that by hand. So they sort of go in and it goes through a change control board, it gets approved, a manual process, very lengthy, and that's a real challenge because today's applications experience very erratic workloads according to the time of the season, time of the year, seasonal variation, getting featured on Facebook, who knows. So this kind of legacy application lifecycle management is not very well suited for the nature of the way we want to do business today. And just to reinforce, you end up with multiple groups, separate artifacts for each group, and manual handoffs. We'll talk about the impact that has in terms of delivery schedules in just a moment. Using Enstratius, you've had the next generation application lifecycle management. So the provisioning process, that developer who said, I've got to start doing some work, they self-service. They pick from a service catalog of already configured and approved images, which means they have no manual work to start setting up their development environment. And in fact, they can create during their development process, they'll create a deployment template that describes the entire application environment. So it will bring up the entire environment, install all the components, configure them all, connect all the virtual machines so that they're all talking to one another. And that's all done automatically. So again, it's an automated process. When it comes time to put it into deployment, we fully support the move toward DevOps, where basically system configurations are applied automatically. There's no need for manual work by operations personnel. This integrates with the operations tools like Chef and Puppet and so forth, and it's an automated process. And then when the application is actually in production, we are actively monitoring the loads of all the components, of all the instances, of all the resources. And as they experience greater or lesser loads, we will dynamically adjust the resource pool so that enough virtual machines are present to manage the load that's appropriate, and yet that they're not extra resources just sitting around idle, but still costing you in terms of pricing. We support elasticity. We have cost chargeback and tracking so that organizations that have multiple applications running up in Amazon, we can track back the cost of those resources to the actual groups that are using them. Kind of closing the circle on the pay for what you use and make sure that what you use is actually assigned to your cost center. And again, that's all processed. That whole process is automated. So just to kind of reinforce it, there are multiple groups, but you have shared artifacts. So basically, the artifacts of the application are passed from group to group. Appropriate governance controls are put into place, but there's automated handoffs to the whole process. Kind of the outcome of that in terms of what does this mean for application lifecycle agility, you can see we compare and contrast the Enstratius way with the traditional way. And if you look at provisioning, we were generous. We said 7 days. As I said, one of our very largest customers, 3 to 6 weeks for them to get a virtual machine to a developer. Using our service catalog and the self-service, it's an hour for a developer to get a hold of resources and start work. In terms of development, traditionally, to get all those resources for the developer to get all the components installed, configured, connected up to one another, it might be as much as 2 weeks because we have very complex environments today, application environments. When there's a deployment template in place that describes the application, a new developer can join and have an environment up and running inside of an hour, and that's the kind of power of using the shared artifacts that are automated. Deployment, typically, getting an application into production, it's 30 days minimum because everything has to start from scratch. It's got to be, brought up. You try it. It didn't really come together. We have to do it again. Again, we're sharing the same artifacts. They're brought in. They're handed over to a different group. The access controls remove the developer access because it's no longer appropriate for developers to have access. It puts in access controls to enable operations personnel to access these instances and resources. But the same artifact is used through that whole thing. So basically, you're changing the configuration of the deployment. You can bring that up and into production inside of a day. And then operations, typically to make changes to support higher loads, add resources, again, probably 7 days, best case. We do it automatically. We're monitoring load and adding and subtracting resources as required. So you don't even have to have operations personnel, looking at the loads and saying, we better go do something. So, when you contrast the kinds of application lifecycle timeframes in these environments, legacy environments, it's nearly 2 months to go from, with all of the time spent just deploying resources. With us, it's a couple of days. So we powerfully enable agility within the application lifecycle management. What I'd like to do next is talk about an actual case study. So you've heard the description. Now let's seeing is believing, and let's talk about Acorn Media Group. You may think you're not familiar with Acorn Media Group, but in fact, if you watch any British television, you've been touched by Acorn Media. They are the distributors for products like Foyle's War, Are You Being Served, Midsummer Murders here in the U.S. So you have seen them. Next time you watch one of those shows, either on DVD or on TV, look toward the end. You're very likely to see the Acorn Media Group logo. To share what they are, they're distinctive home video products and other merchandise to customers in North America, UK, and Australia. In the past, they were a DVD distribution business and very effective with it. But as you know, today, everybody wants everything right away using products like Amazon, streaming media, and so forth. So they needed to move into the next generation and start doing video streaming with their products that they distribute. And their application requirement is fast delivery and no downtime. You don't want to go on to Acorn Media and say, I really want to watch Midsummer Murders and have it come up with a 500 error, right? So they came to Enstratius and said, can you help us build our next generation video streaming application with the ability to support an agile lifecycle management and to ensure that our products are always up and running? So They used multi-region AWS CloudFront deployment with our Enstratius management and development services from a partner called Valtira. The Enstratius provides geo-balancing, so we deliver local content and services. So we support CloudFront so that a user who is accessing Acorn videos is getting it served up from the nearest point of presence to reduce latency and improve bandwidth. Of course, almost infinite scaling capabilities thanks to our good friends at Amazon. We have failover and disaster recovery in the event of regional failure. So even if in the kind of almost inconceivable situation where Amazon East went down, we could quickly and immediately enable Acorn to switch over to their mirrored environment in Amazon US West. So there'd be virtually no downtime for their application in the unlikely event of an entire regional going down. High volume and low cost. Amazon, as Miles alluded to earlier, Amazon lives in a world where they know that nobody ever says, gosh, I love the service, but I just wish I were paying more. In fact, they've been reducing prices steadily, and Acorn loves that, and we support that. And then we provide encryption and access controls that Acorn takes advantage of to ensure that only appropriate people access their videos. They're a for-profit business, so they have to make sure that there's controls on who accesses them, and they have to make sure that they're stored in an encrypted fashion so that nobody might somehow malevolently get to those resources and download them or take advantage of them or hack them or whatever it might be. So they use those things. Those are capabilities that Enstratius brings to the table to support their use of Amazon Web Services. The all-important architecture slide, and I'm going to drill down in this a little bit, but the first thing to note is this shows this as supporting multiple regions. So we have 3 regions here, and we're using multiple availability zones within each region. So we have redundancy both within the region and within AWS. So this starts out of the box with geographic distribution and redundancy so that Acorn will never have their application go down. They're able, their users are able to support this through mobile PC and Roku, which is awesome. And they, Amazon CloudFront is used to deliver both static streaming resources as well as dynamic. So we help them take advantage of all of the resources of CloudFront, both dynamic and static content. We are using ELB with SSL for that. And behind the firewall, they've got Tomcat MySQL running, which of course is using EBS. In terms of, they also use Chef and Puppet, or they use Chef, I should say, for their development side, and so they have a separate test and development environment in which they're using Chef to serve up those components, both standard components and the ones that make up the Acorn Media Group's application. And surrounding all of this are their use of a number of different AWS, what I call platform services. So they are taking advantage within their application of things like simple notification service, simple email service, cloud search, Route 53, and data pipeline. So all of those things are used within the context of their application, but they're also used within the context of being managed by Enstratius. So unlike a lot of other cloud management platforms, we do not wall you off from being able to use those kinds of capabilities that are available, which make your application much easier to develop and much better and much richer. So, people often say, okay, great, there's Amazon and there's Enstratius. How should I know when it would be appropriate for me to be looking toward Enstratius? And here's some, sort of guidelines for that. look to Enstratius when your AWS adoption is, in a way, too successful. You've got too many accounts. You've got operational controls that are not consistently shared across all of those groups, and you may not even have visibility into what all those different groups are doing. And you're finding it difficult to, make sure that you're assigning costs appropriately. Everyone loves the idea of using a lot of resources and not getting charged for them, but the flip side of that is somebody who's paying extra freight, and you really want to be in a position where you're assigning those costs to the appropriate groups. So Enstratius would be very appropriate for that. Look to Enstratius if you need to move application agility past development, past the, we can enable developer self-service, and you need to be able to incorporate operations into that environment and, the application in production. Enstratius is a good choice for that. You have multiple cloud initiatives that need one pane of glass management infrastructure. You want one consistent mechanism for having governance, imposing governance, management controls, one set of cost tracking and so forth. We're a good choice for that. And what I'd encourage you is to give us a spin. We make a free trial available to not just you, but anyone who would choose to. Just visit Enstratius.com/trial. Of course, you will have to have a cloud account. What we do is act on your behalf as a proxy. So we ask you to give us the credentials for your account so that we can act on your behalf. And of course, that means you have to have an account. So this is kind of the fine print of, we can't magically make the requirement for a cloud account go away. And then for more information in Enstratius resources, go to Enstratius.com/AWS. Now, with that, Sherry, I think you're going to take it over and do some questions. So I have that right?
Yes, thank you, Bernard, and thank you, Miles, for a great overview. Folks, if you've joined kind of midstream, we'd like to invite you to submit any questions that you might have for AWS or for Enstratius of talking points you've heard today. And we have a few questions to start off, and I'm going to point this first one to you, Miles. Can you speak to how successful is AWS with regulatory, compliance-driven industries such as the financial space?
Sure, absolutely. I think, we've worked very hard. I think if you look at the very beginning of this presentation, we talked through a lot of the details and structure for regulatory compliance in terms of, I think the kind of a high-level piece is PCI DSS Level 1. So that's Visa, the credit card processing company, certifying that you can store credit card information, including the full 16 digits of the credit card number, in storage systems on AWS. That's a powerful endorsement of the structure that we've built, and there are dozens of companies that are also directly in the financial services space, as I think many folks that have worked in this industry will be familiar with. It's relatively difficult to get those kinds of businesses to go on record about using just about anything, and we're very careful to protect customers' identities when they don't want to be poster children for a new technology. But we have worked closely with some banks that have been able to get on the record. Washington Trust Bank uses our systems as a backup and archival target to help them meet their requirements for long-term storage of data and highly available restores of that data. And there are other examples as well on the AWS website. So certainly suggest you take a look there. Maybe a whole other category of important regulated businesses is healthcare or medical businesses, and we have many, many businesses that together with us have achieved HIPAA compliance. So lots of successes there.
Terrific. Hey, folks, if you have indicated that you're having some challenges with viewing slides or perhaps audio, I just recommend try refreshing your browser. It might be a Java or Flash issue on your network side, and we apologize if you're having some issues. We're not seeing it on our end. Next question, I'll point back. This is an AWS question as well, Miles. Can you speak to if AWS will be changing their policy or not charging for down or stopped VM in terms of only charging for storage of it. Does that
Sure.
question make sense?
Sure. So to clarify this for folks, AWS has built our systems in the context of this central idea, one of our central benefits of paying only for what you use. And we've tried to be as narrow to that as possible. We really want to make it so that when you turn something on, you're paying for it, and when you turn it off, you're not paying for it anymore. So today in EC2, if you stop an EC2 instance, that's a behavior that's made possible due to the persistent storage of EBS storage systems. You can suspend processing, so you're not using compute anymore, and you've lost, say, for example, the storage that's part of the local ephemeral disk and the IP address that's associated internally with the machine and some other pieces. The virtual machine has stopped, but your storage is persisted. So the next time you turn that machine on, you have access to it. We don't charge for the instance hours for the compute time while that machine is not running because, well, it's not running. And we only charge for things when they're on. So we have no intention of changing that policy. And we're constantly, in fact, the other direction, looking for new ways to identify surfaces where we can help customers who have the ability to access our systems with greater control, leverage that control to save themselves money. Another great example of that is archiving data from S3 to Glacier. That's someplace where if you know you're not going to access or unlikely to access data, you can move it to storage that costs roughly 1/9 of primary S3 storage and be able to do that with just a couple clicks. So lots of focus there on helping you save.
Great. This next question, Bernard, I'm going to point back to you. Can you speak a little bit about how you manage security from the Enstratius side?
Well, it's a very broad question. I'll hit a couple of points, and if I don't hit the points that the person really wants to know about, let them know. But from the perspective of how we manage security within Amazon or any of our cloud environments, rather than like many cloud environments are set up to basically have kind of a virtual machine owner, and that you have one identity that kind of controls that, we actually support multiple and dynamic identities within a virtual machine, and as those are added or subtracted. So we basically, instead of one shared key among everyone, basically every individual that is authorized to touch that machine will have a person-specific key put onto that machine with associated rights and responsibilities. So somebody might be put in there as a developer, which would preclude them from being able to access system resources. So it's very fine-grained control around that. So that's a very common question. How do you manage access controls and key management? And and most organizations do, they choose to have our system integrated with their on-premise identity management system, and we do a kind of poll from that and pull in identities from there. And so that means we reflect the very latest status of the organization as of the time of the last poll, which prevents a situation where someone leaves or worse gets fired from the organization. They go off, and yet they still have access to they still have their old key, and they still have access to the instances running up in a cloud environment because nobody remembered to go remove that key or change it from that person. So we have much more fine-grained control around key management and access controls. In terms of how we manage that on-premise, we recommend that people put all of that key management, we have it in a completely different database. We recommend people put it into a separate subnet. It's all encrypted, and it's encrypted in such a way that we don't even have access to it. it's done on a dynamic basis. So that protects customers from us being able to get in and doing those things as well. In terms of things like IPS or IDS, we would typically install OSSec to address those kinds of things. We would install that on the instances to prevent intrusions from the outside and so forth. I don't know if that addresses all the questions, the particular aspects or elements that the person had, but if it hasn't, they're more than welcome to do a follow-up, and I'd be happy to address it.
Great, thank you. I think that provides a great foundation. I'm going to point this question back to either Miles or you, Bernard. It's sort of up for grabs. But this is a question that often folks have. It's generalized in the sense that if I have a staff of competent IT specialists, what's the value add for using a cloud service proxy?
Maybe I can take one pass at it, Bernard, and then if you have some color to add, I'm happy to have you put that on top.
Sure.
I think we heard this same question about 3 years ago pretty frequently. I have a competent set of IT staff. Why would I use a cloud? Right? And the answer to both questions is actually relatively similar. Of course, you could certainly go build from scratch your own private cloud environment. The issue is there are a huge number of benefits of offloading that work that allow you to focus on much more meaningful, much more differentiated, typically much more business valuable effort. We've found from a lot of customers that the work that was ununique, it was totally the same from effort to effort, just didn't add any kind of differentiating value. And while that message seems to have sunk in and everybody's kind of agreed now with that from a cloud perspective, the cloud management tools now are kind of getting exposed to that same level of feedback. Well, my people know how to use the command line. I'm pretty snappy in the Amazon Web Console. Why would I want to use this kind of value add? What we find from a lot of businesses is that once they get in, past their 10th project or their 20th project or their 50th project, and they're really starting to, wrap their business processes around the speed and agility that a cloud provider supports, they'll start doing things like building themselves consoles and building their own control tools and driving the work to integrate themselves with centralized permissioning libraries and key management utilities and all of the sort of price analysis tools. All of those services I've just described are a part of a management service like Enstratius. And so you can either choose that you are the best at that work in the world and that your ability to do that development differentiates you from the competitors in your market space, or that you're not the best at that development in the world, and that taking advantage of someone who has that as the core focus of their business might be a more efficient way to use your typically constrained and precious on-staff employee, developer, and support engineer time.
Well, I'll just, thanks, Miles. I think that's exactly dead on. And I'll just add, we love talking to companies that have gone down that road, because when they turn to us, they know how difficult it is to do what we do, and they're convinced of the value. And so, we're kind of oftentimes companies' plan B. They start off thinking they can do it themselves. They got smart folks, and then they realize, boy, this is a lot more complex than we thought. And all of a sudden, I've got people working on stuff that isn't actually helping me do what my charter is from the company, which is develop applications to help us run the business. So.
Great, thanks, Miles and Bernard. The next question is along the lines of, I'm going to point this back to you, Bernard. Can you speak a little bit more depth around how customers should think about bringing their existing AWS applications over to the Enstratius solution?
Sure. There's sort of the quick and easy way, and then there's the richer and requiring more work. So the quick and easy way is basically you can just start to manage the same instances that you manage the Amazon Management Console, or the same resources, through our interface, and we can support that fully and do that. Typically, though, people turn to us not because they want to replicate what they can already do, but they want to have the more sophisticated identity management in place, access controls, cost tracking, so forth and so on. And so to achieve that, basically we recommend we have an agent that we install on the virtual machines that we manage that gives us access to lots of metrics and so forth, and then enables us to really do that kind of dynamic adjustment of keys and identity management and so forth. And so what we recommend then is to get the full features of Enstratius, what they should be doing is looking to create new images with their existing software components and incorporate the Enstratius agent into those environments. And that would give them much richer functionality. And many companies do it as a two-phase process. They start just by saying, we're going to bring it inside this environment, and then they say, okay, now let us start building out and getting a richer set of application management.
Great. Well, folks, we're out of time, and I'd like to thank Bernard Golden and Miles Ward for presenting today. We'd like to thank you all for taking some time to join us and learn a little bit more about app development and business agility on the Amazon Web Services